Hey, this is Move to Improve with your host, Dr. Matthew Uchacz. Today we have Olympian Duff Gibson here with us and our very own Dr. Greg Uchacz, Sports Chiropractor. And so, nice to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we got a couple things we kind of want to dive into, but we don't really format the podcast all too much. We kind of just let it run casually. So tell us, Duff, what are you up to these days?
Well, my one level of consistency throughout the pandemic is the fact that I'm a firefighter. So when sports have been canceled, when kids have been doing school from home, my job has remained constant, and that's been a good thing. I think one of the topics that you wanted to dive into was the program, our family business, I guess, called Dark Horse Athletic, which until this fall, until we could run a program outside, had been, like a lot of other programs, had been canceled for a year and a half. But Dark Horse is it's a kids multi-sport program. It's intended for elementary school ages, so roughly 7 to 12. We've had younger and older, but it's multi-sport. It's typically run in a gym, so whatever you can think of to do in a gym, that's what it is. And it is designed with what drives kids out of sport and has kids not enjoy physical activity in mind. So we don't do any head-to-head competition. We typically, instead of playing basketball, for example, every kid gets a ball, and we'll do challenges relating to dribbling, like can you dribble with your wrong hand and your eyes closed, and can you sit down and stand up, and that sort of thing, to foster personal growth. And it's multi-sport also, so I have some speed skaters and some track athletes and all different kinds of athletes to teach kids a variety of skills. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. That's honestly a great concept because it allows children to kind of dip their toes into athletics and find the route that is going to be best suited for them and take it in from many aspects.
Well, that's part of the challenge. If a kid sees hockey or soccer and on TV or wherever, or an older sibling does it, and they dive into it, you don't really get a sense of what your personal strengths and weaknesses are unless you try a variety of things. And when I was a kid, school was where all the sports teams were. I guess hockey was community. I suppose there would have been community aspects to different sports, but almost everything was a part of the school. And then what we did on our spare time was hours and hours of playing outdoors. There were no trophies involved, no parents telling us what we were doing right and wrong. And we just played for hours and hours for the love of it. And you wouldn't play for hours if it was for any other reason. So we loved it, never kept score, never cared what the score was until someone had to go, and then we say next goal wins. That was literally the only time that we worried about the score. And I look back as sort of a high performance athlete. I look back, and part of my success, I think, relating to that motivation was established when I was a kid, and playing for hours and hours for no reason other than the love of the game. There's no one pushing me to do it. Well, my parents were pushing me out of the house, but what I did when we were outside was for the love of the game. So I think that's a big part of it. And so that ties back to Dark Horse because it's always changing. It's always silly, frankly. Like we're always walking the line between being silly with the kids and losing complete control of them. And it's important to walk that line because they have to want to come back. It has to be a fun experience. It can't be, what drives kids out of sport, which we know it's too serious. It's about wins and losses when, for me, foundationally, and maybe for a lot of people in my generation, it was because that's a fun thing to do. And to inspire a kid that might be the case is a valuable thing, I think.
Absolutely. If a kid's going to go anywhere in sports, he's going to have that internal motivation, hopefully.
That's right.
And that external pressure, I see what you're saying, can definitely push kids away from sports or you find a lot of kids that kind of grow up and their heart's not in it anymore, but they feel the expectation is there, and so they're kind of showing up for their parents or for somebody else, right?
Yeah. I think it's hard to. I look at some of just randomly in the fire department. I have two co-workers just on my shift, so 1/4 of the fire department is what I'm looking at, and I know a guy who was cut from AAA as a bantam, and he played for the Flames, and he played in the NHL for a while. And I know a guy who had an agent when he was 13, and he didn't end up going anywhere. So our thoughts, we assume the Tiger Woods story is the one that keeps coming up. That
right.
if you start when you're 3 and you're excellent when you're 5 and you're the best guy when you're 5, 7, all the way up, that's somehow a good thing, or that's something that you would want to emulate, when that is the opposite of the norm. And so what is the norm? Someone who loves to do it and does it on their own, in their driveway, on their, with their buddies, that sort of thing, for fun in their spare time. Because, how far you're going to go is, you really have no sense until you've gone through puberty anyway. Right. So how good you are at 8 or 10 is almost not relevant, I don't think. But what is a love of the game and why you're doing it. And is it a work ethic, or are you just doing something you love to do? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And so you obviously are in a position to see and allow kids to kind of find their passion that way, which I'm sure can be pretty powerful. Yeah,
I don't even think of it in those terms. I think of it as the goal of youth sport organizations. And this is impossible to measure, I think, or you'd need 50 years to do this well, is how many of your kids are still doing it when they're my age and older. So how do you measure that? That's a tough thing to measure. So are they finding their passion, or are they just, I would put it in simpler terms, are they doing something that's fun and healthy? And as a consequence, the more kids who do that because it's fun and their parents kick them outside of the house, then you're going to get more kids who are high performance athletes anyway, right?
And a lifelong of healthy habits of staying active, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Uchacz, I see your hand was up there.
Yeah, I'm chiming in because, first of all, welcome, Duff. You guys just jumped immediately into Dark Horse. I'm like, hey, let's talk about our history together and your Olympic experience, and then we'll talk about youth sport and then we'll jump into Dark Horse, and now we're just in this massive conversation, which is great. But anyway, I just want to let our viewers know that Duff Gibson was the 2006 Olympic gold medalist, the Olympic champion in the sport of skeleton. And he and I were together at those Olympics, and it was 2006, right, in Torino. And Duff was, you were a true stud, man. You beat the field. It was good. It was so fun to be part of those Olympic Games and to see you win that. One of the moments of my life, actually, winning that, seeing you win that. It was unbelievable. And then he talked about being a firefighter. When we came back from the Olympics in 2006, when the plane landed on the tarmac, there were fire trucks that escorted the plane back to the gate. That was pretty cool too.
I have pictures of that because I was in the plane, obviously.
Yeah.
So someone in the fire hall was a photographer, and I have pictures of that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, man, that was.
And then the pilot said, "Okay, nobody panic. Here's what's going on." So that was kind of fun too. Yeah.
That was an experience of a lifetime for sure. So, anyways, we won't go through all that stuff. We can if you like, but I just want to chime into this whole youth sport thing. So you say it's hard to measure because it's a lifetime of involvement and whatnot, but there is measurements. The number one reason why kids quit sport is they're not having fun. Period. Full stop. So if you can create a program where kids are going to have fun, and in most cases, to me, fun is not comparing themselves to their peers, but just enjoying the time doing fun stuff. That's why they say in sport, right?
Yeah.
And I know that was you growing up, because you know how I met him? Way back when it was still Lindsay Park, remember, in 1996, maybe 97-ish.
Yeah. That's the ballpark anyway.
Yeah, and I was working with Kelly Forbes, and I was working with Anton Joseph. They were doing the acceleration program at Lindsay Park.
And what was your role?
I was working with CITC, Calgary National Track Club, and all the athletes there with John Cannon. We did some overspeed training, and I got to know those guys. And I believe you, and then I also worked with the Dutch bobsleigh team, Rob Gertz, Marcel Welton, right? Remember? And Rob Gertz's girlfriend was Sarah Monk, who was with the women's national team.
Yep.
So I started going out to some training sessions there, and you were actually bobsleigh at that point.
Yeah.
Right? You came from speed skating to bobsleigh. So there's a point to all this. So you came from speed skating to bobsleigh, then ultimately to skeleton, right? And so when I talk about somebody having fun and doing multi-sport as a kid, Duff was the multiple winner of Calgary's
toughest competitor
alive competition. The guy could do 50 pull-ups or something like that, and then there was all these other, but it was ridiculous how much you would you won that a bunch of years in a row, didn't you?
Not a bunch, just three.
How many times did you compete?
3.
That's my point. Yeah, you remember, that's way back, eh?
It is, because
20 something years back.
It was 97 that, and I only know that because it's painted on the wall in one station, but when Calgary hosted the World Police and Fire Games, that was 97. That's right. And they started hosting that toughest competitor alive. The University of Calgary hosted that event for the World Police and Fire Games, and they kept hosting it after that.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
so 98, 99, and 2000, I guess. That was, those were the 3 years. And then Kelly Forbes was, of all the people, and I bet you a dozen people said this. Oh, I heard you won that TCA thing. I'm going to show up next year and give you a run for your money. Yeah. And Kelly did. He's the only one who actually did. And he won his division, too. He didn't quite win overall, but
well, he'll never quite beat you, Kelly. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, in some things, though. He's the epitome of the multi-sport athlete also, because he showed up 5 minutes before. It was a cross-country 5K was the first event in that. And he did 18 minutes cross-country for 5K.
You got him and Kelly Forbes are super close friends, right? So that's why I pick on
and arch enemies too? Or?
No,
kind of, yeah.
Well, I see it, and Kelly was not somebody that would ever turn down a bet or a challenge. I remember he was on the national skeleton team, and we were in Sestriere, which is Torino, basically. We're up in the where the bobsleigh track was in Italy, and I bet Kelly he couldn't climb to the top of the mountain and back down. Remember that? It's like 2 hours or something like that. I give him this time. I'll bet you $1,000 you can't do that. And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, of course I can. Remember that? And
yes, anyways, I remember.
He's at the start line, and our coach comes running out. You are not doing this. Yeah, we got in a lot of trouble for that. But
and you were staff.
Yeah.
And causing the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was the guy.
Yeah. But that was like a lot of what I preach is challenge. And the fun part isn't who's the best in the world, it's you challenge yourself. Yeah. Or if we're close, then it's a challenge for us to compete against each other. And Kelly is such an excellent example of that, because we were fairly closely matched in ping pong. So we'd have these epic, if you're in Lake Placid, for example, they had 2 or 3 ping pong tables in their training center. Yeah. And so you'd go to places and there'd be ping pong tables, and we'd have these epic battles. And the Italian bobsled team, they had a couple of good players. So that was part of it. And I've had, it would always, with Kelly, it always had to be a bet. And it was not, for tons of money or anything, and it often wasn't for money. It was some kind of penalty that the other person had to do.
Get on one knee and tell me I'm the best.
Yeah, stuff like that. But I remember I had at his house, or I guess his parents' house in Ogden, he has a ping pong table there. And so he once bet me that if I gave him a 15-point lead, he could beat me in ping pong where I could use a paddle and he could use a flattened Rice Krispie square. And that's
about right.
That's about right. That's
Yeah,
Kelly.
that was
And
Kelly.
he lost 21-15.
That's right. Oh my gosh.
Gotta hand it to him though.
Oh my God, those are good times, right? Those are good times. But anyway, so for our viewership, so I'm just switching gears again. All these things we talked about.
We missed a couple things at the beginning. Sure.
Yeah, so I don't even know what it was, but I believe it was last fall. You, myself, and Chris Cedarstrand kind of had this thought that, man alive, like they've shut everything down, but they've turned off all adult sport, and they've basically shut down all kids sport. And we talked about how we felt that was absolutely detrimental, right, to our kids in terms of their mental health and physical health, right? And there's so many benefits to kids being in sport, right, from a growth and physical and maturation component, as well as community engagement and socialization skills and a sense of accomplishment and all that goes with that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we talked about that, and we said, well, we got Chris Cedarstrand. I believe it was last November, December is what it was. We got Chris.
There was snow on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got Chris Dornan, rather. Sorry, he's the media attaché for bobsleigh, skeleton, a whole bunch of teams. But and we asked him if he'd put out a media release and about us, wanting to engage with media to talk about the benefits of kids, getting kids back engaged in sport. And I remember within a day or two of doing that release, we all did media spots, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what I had here at CTV, and there was a couple different interviews I did, and you did an interview, Chris Cedarstrand did an interview, all about the benefits of a kid being in sport and how important it is for us to allow that to continue on. And I was really proud of that effort that we did. I don't know if it was us or not that push, but within 24 to 48 hours after that, the Alberta government opened up, kids sport again, and I thought that was so important and so beneficial for our kids to get back at it, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like that's kind of why you started Dark Horse, right?
It is. And for me, especially there was a time when you had no idea about what the effect was or where COVID was going to go, and I remember watching actually the news one day where there was back-to-back stories where someone was complaining that the restrictions weren't tight enough and it wasn't protecting our children, and the next story was that it was too tight and it was ruining our business. So I have an understanding that's, I don't know what the right answer is, that because you're going to have half the population perhaps unhappy with that. It's a tough one. But for me, the silver lining is, what we did as a family was, okay, we're going to go nuts unless we go outside. So we'd hike more. My kids, now the ski hills were closed down for a while, but last winter my kids skied more than they had the previous 5 years combined, let's say. So that's a very healthy, that's a studied relationship between mental health and a connectedness to nature.
Yeah,
100%. And when skiing to me is, if you take hockey practice off, and luckily Tay's coach is still on board with that, and Tay plays a high level hockey now as a 14-year-old, and his coach is still okay with getting away and skiing. And that's a really important thing, because it's the buddies, it's the socialization, it's fun, and it's doing something they potentially could do when they're 70.
Yeah.
And so that's a lifestyle, that's a lifelong thing, and then all the relationships to the mental health as well.
And I could argue that the multi-sport component to it, like how much better an athlete is off the ice or off the field or off whatever, the better they will be on, right? Like we know that there's a direct correlation between that, right? That multi-sport, that not early specialization to, do a bunch of different sports. You just develop better human beings, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be able to replicate it, but Steve Norris always says every kid should do a running sport, a gliding sport, a water-related sport, so you're covering all the different angles as well.
It's super. So there's, we're going to let you go soon, but I just want to bring up, there's some stuff we've been doing with Proactive. So we had an opportunity to work with the PX3M program, the hockey program at Sport, and we did a whole bunch of functional movement testing on those kids in that program, and sort of age-dependent testing, and we put them through physical challenges, and we did sort of that full MSK physical of checking hip mobility and all firing sequences and whatnot. And then we've also had the opportunity to do this with a number of sports, with a number of kids, and in particular Southwest United. We have another clinic at Southwest United in their indoor training facility, and we've done functional movement testing with their population of kids, and it is really interesting that there are two distinct, massive breakdowns in patterning that each has its own distinct breakdown of patterning. So for instance, in hockey, you see, because skates have gotten to be so stiff and so tight, that kids lack soleus flexibility. They lack calf flexibility with the knee bent. There's a dramatic loss of flexibility in that muscle. Kids lack a dramatic, they have a dramatic loss of single leg balance and coordination in hockey.
In hockey they do.
They do, because they're in a skate that's so stiff that holds everything in place. So when you ask them without a skate on, with just a bare foot, to stand on one foot and challenge them for 30 seconds and maybe ask them to do some menial movement pattern, they can't.
That is interesting. Because you know what? Do you mind if I jump in there?
No. I'm going to tell you, and just remind me to tell you the soccer stuff after.
Okay.
Right, but there's some specific stuff with hockey, that's pretty wild, right?
This is a brief comment, but in a Dark Horse camp that we've run, we had a lot of the kids are hockey ringette, but we had a figure skating coach, speed skaters, hockey players. And the figure skater said that, and he trains hockey athletes regularly on ice, and he'll say, okay, here's your challenge. And it's, you stand on one foot and you pump on one foot. You don't touch, the stick doesn't touch the ice, the other foot doesn't touch the ice, and you have to go through the pylons in a circle, like a face-off circle. You have to go around the circle, only pushing with your left leg or only pushing with your right leg.
Right.
And that's really tough to do. And of course, as a figure skater, he can do it with his eyes closed.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me. But it's, if you had said, parents tell me that soccer, this is just parents talk, so they say soccer is just as bad as hockey. It's worse than hockey in terms of early specialization. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm curious to know what you found testing soccer athletes.
Well, I don't know if it's worse or better. I just know what we found. And we found a complete different breakdown of patterning. Both sports, I'll talk about that in a sec. So the very specific patterning breakdown that we see in soccer is lateral movement. Is their lateral chain, their lateral glute development is awful. And so what you see is that they start to cheat in their lateral movements. They don't shuffle side to side or go side to side. What they do is they will externally rotate, like they'll turn their leg out to go in that direction. They'll never shuffle side to side. So they call evasive tactics or challenging tactics. They start to lose. So if a person's doing those tactics properly and they develop that skill, they're going to be faster changing directions. If a person doesn't develop that, they develop an altering movement pattern to do that, they're ultimately going to be less quick or less adaptive to that movement pattern. Does that make sense?
Because they have to change direction before they go in that direction.
That's right. And so our job and what we're doing now with them is we're doing all this functional testing. We're doing actually next in January, 480 kids put in through that functional movement challenge.
Soccer?
All soccer. And then what we're doing is we're coordinating with they have strength and Anton Joseph is in there actually with Strive. And so we're coordinating with Strive to create training programs based on the deficiencies we find, and then engaging with the coaches to talk about drills and challenges. Super interesting, because these kids are developing these ultra movement patterns. And you know what? Soccer is very much a skill sport, just like hockey is very much a skill sport. In other words, football is not a skill sport. Football is very much a physical attribute sport, which basically means if you were to take an 18-year-old person who is 250 pounds, 5% body fat, can deadlift 700 pounds, has a 4.440, can broad jump, you know what I mean?
And started that week.
Yeah, and they're just an absolute stud.
Yeah.
You can turn them into a professional football player within the year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You take that same person and put them on a soccer pitch and make them a professional soccer player or a professional hockey player. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So soccer and hockey are much more skill-based sports, right? So that means that kids who participate in soccer early and do it a lot are typically going to be better than those that don't do that all the time.
Right.
Now, I granted there's genetics in there, right? That fast twitch muscle fiber to be able to change
Yeah.
directions quickly and so on and so forth. But
It
still,
doesn't mean they have the athletic ability.
right.
Yeah.
They have the skill ability. So what happens is because they start to develop these poor movement patterns, when they start to go through puberty and they get a little bit older, and they're not as physically sound as someone who created proper movement patterns. Now, those individuals might have happened into proper movement patterns, but doing multi-sport or doing lots of different activities helps you become a better, stable athlete because you're so many different movement patterns. You do the same stuff over and over and over and over again, you start to develop these imbalances. So we're finding that kids, once they get into ages 15, 16, 17, 18, if they're not as physically sound, regardless of the fact they have the skill set, they can't keep up. So that's when you start to lose it. You need to create that athlete that's moving properly for them to excel past their peers. So
I thought for sure you were going to say they're injured constantly.
Well, for sure that's the case, but they don't perform as well. Mm-hmm. And that's that early specialization problem.
Yeah.
I'm not even, because I want to talk about a comparison between hockey and soccer. Posture. It is universal that these kids cannot not hip hinge properly. They cannot dissociate upper body movement with lower body movement.
Who are we talking about?
Both. So it is an epidemic today for posture for these kids. These imbalances, because they're on their computer, they're on their phone, they're on their tablet, they're whatever, right? And so we're seeing it across the board. These kids are developing improper spinal positions, right? And their shoulders are internally rotated. And in sport, they're losing power and their core's not strong, so they're breaking down. We're getting more younger patients coming in with back pain and, lots of injuries associated. So that's where the injury piece is coming in for me, is that we're seeing across all sports, we're seeing this posture related. In hockey, it's a thing where they can't get into athlete ready position because of the tightness of the calves, the tightness of the skates, so they tend to roll their shoulders forward and they tend to hunch forward. Soccer, you see it all the time. They got these internally rotated arms. It's the same thing across the board. So, but again,
and really everybody in our day and age is falling victim. It's just
Except-
sad to see it when they're that young.
except kids who are physically sound, like kids who are doing a whole bunch of different sports and stuff, they develop properly. So that's my whole point on the early specialization piece, is that if you can get kids doing a bunch of different sports, they just develop more soundly. They develop the proper movement patterns for all this, right? So anyways, that's my thing. And we're seeing it. It's seeing it start to roll out in the exams that we're doing.
It is interesting seeing, especially adults, and where you can kind of ask them, what sports did you play as a kid? Because those patterns are lifelong if you never push to change
100%
them.
agree. I see it a lot in these guys that used to play like in Europe, hockey in Europe and stuff like that, like the types of breakdowns that they have. It's interesting.
Yeah. There's one. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say the lateral thing you're talking about relating to the soccer.
Yep.
I worry that you could, like with a pylon drill or a couple of different exercises, you could address that fairly effectively, could you not?
For sure you could. So we're seeing two things. We're seeing that lateral stabilization. Three things, actually. Lateral stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
Two, we're seeing poor balance again. Again, stiff cleats. So as soon as you take a cleat off and they have to use their foot to balance. So, and I found, and talking to the technical director of the organization, he's like, I'm trying to have these kids do these various defensive and movement tactics. And he goes, I can't get them on one foot long enough. Like they're supposed to stay and then cut the other way. And he goes, I can't get them to balance on one foot enough. I'm like, we're seeing it in our exams, the balance piece. It's below normative values, in other words, right? So pretty interesting. That's an infusion in the equipment. But that's the point, is that with these kids, with Anton and his group, we need to address this, right? So we need to do dry land, we need to look at your lateral stabilization and working with drills and strength and conditioning to fix that. But the last piece is running technique. Because they have poor posture and they have poor core control, they tend to have poor sprinting technique, right? They can't get their hips high, the knees high, they're not standing tall, right? They tend to anterior pelvic tilt, so they're using their hamstrings, lack of glute development. There's all these pieces in that. It gets a little technical. But
See, when the first thing that pops into my mind when you say lateral stability is you could probably do a bunch of drills to address that, but you're always chasing the symptoms. And if they're multi-sport athletes and skiers and skateboarders and hockey players as well as playing soccer, then you already have a built-in defense against that.
That's right,
and
because you've developed that strength, right?
And a resistance to the burnout too.
Yeah.
And a love of the game.
And a love of the game, baby.
Okay, so
Yeah, we solved the world's problems today.
Yeah.
There you go. Dr.
and it's
Jurgis.
Dark Horse.
Yeah. Do you want to spell that for us and everything?
Darkhorseathletic.ca.
Guys, check it out. Also, I'd like for all our listeners to go on YouTube and Google Duff Gibson 2006 Winter Olympics and just go see his run, because it's amazing, something worth seeing for sure.
It was pretty cool. Can I just want to throw in another little story on that.
Yeah.
So after you win, well, the top 5 people in a race have to go instantly have to go to doping, right? You have to go to doping control. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go to doping control, and it was a pretty cool experience. So I was the guy that went with them. Duff won. Jeff Payne got silver, and Paul Bohm almost got bronze. He was like 2/10 off, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so he got 4th place. And so I have Jeff, and I have Duff, and I have Paul in there, and Christian Bromley was in there. Gregor Stali, I think that was the top 5.
Yeah.
So we're in doping, and Chris Dornan, who's a media attaché, is losing his mind because there's like, I don't know, thousands of people outside there. You remember that? It was just packed, and he texts me, and we had these special phones. He's like, okay, so I go to the door, and I open up the door, and he would just put his, okay, we have the Minister of Sport. So I'd walk into the doping, and I go, okay, Duff, this is the Minister of Sport. And Duff would talk to him. Thank you, sir. No, I appreciate it. Okay. And then I'd give the phone back to it. And then, I remember the whole time, it's like all these phone calls were coming in, and it was like, you guys are going to be on every newspaper the next day, because nobody had done that, right? Like nobody at that point had finished gold, silver.
Well, you know what? Still, the more I think about it, because every once in a while I'll give a little talk and share my experiences, but the only regret, the only disappointment that I have is that Paul, who came 4th, was the consummate teammate. And if there was ever a sport where your teammates contributed to your performance, it's skeleton. And and that's a reflection of how we did, right? Because of the quality of the information, the fact that we were all about the same weight, the fact that we had such self-awareness that we could transmit good feedback to each other about every corner and so on.
How good your healthcare was, by the way.
And for me in particular, that was critical. But what happened on Paul's first run was he comes out of the groove and goes boom into the right wall.
He hit the right wall.
And you couldn't that'd be hard to do if you were trying to do that.
Yeah.
And I think you just go over a piece of ice that's just in the exact wrong spot.
He probably went down a track thousands of times in his life. How many times did he ever hit a wall before one? Never.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And it was, that was just a random
just
thing.
hit something in the groove or whatever, and it just knocked it over. I know. Just about cried when I saw that. But what a comeback, though, right? To come. And I remember having the discussion. I remember having Shane Pearsall in there, and he was the chef, right?
Yep.
And he was also CEO of Bobsled Canada. I remember Tricia Schlachter was in there. I remember we had and Chris Dornan was in there, and we were having this discussion. If we sweep the podium, how are we going to deal with this? This is going to be a thing. Like, how are we going to logistically deal with the challenges of having 3 people sweeping a podium in the Olympic Games for Canada? It was quite the discussion, and finally one person said, you know what, this discussion has never been had in the history of Canada before. It was pretty cool, right? Like, to be part of that. And,
crazy moment.
Oh, it was so close. It was really close.
Also, broke a world record, did you?
For being old, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Nonetheless.
It's fun, you do the interviews or whatever late into that night, and
CBC, remember?
CBC, and so it was. We haven't gone. Jeff is standing beside me, and it's in the village, and it's late at night at this point, and we're about to be interviewed by Brian Williams, and we're talking back and forth. We're not on the air yet, and it's just like, hi, we'll talk to you in a minute, and that sort of thing. And Brian Williams says to me, oh yeah, so I guess you're the oldest Canadian ever to win a gold medal, or the oldest Canadian or the oldest person ever to win a gold medal in an individual sport. And I said, I don't think that's true. I'm sure I would have heard that if that was true. And he yelled at someone off air for giving him bad information.
Is that right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
was it true?
It was true.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was true. Okay. There you go.
Oldest to win a Winter Olympics, correct? Yeah. At the time.
Individual, Winter Olympics, individual sport. Because I feel bad that I don't remember his name, but there was a curler, Russ Howard, was 50, and he won a gold that same Olympics. Wow. And in the Summer Olympics, there was a 50-year-old
but that was
sailor.
But that was an individual.
Right. But there was, in the Summer Olympics, there have been sailors who've been over 50.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was just winter.
That was a pretty unique experience, though, eh? Just all that we went through.
Well, it's got, you know what, I appreciate, I've been in here for treatment, or I brought my son in here for treatment before, and you would bring it up every once in a while. And I enjoy reliving that through your eyes.
Through my eyes,
Yeah. It's been sort of fun.
Well, I just remember how I don't know if I should be bringing this up or not, but I remember how emotional it was. I'm getting emotional now, just because your dad had passed previous, right? So I remember being in there and crying, and talking about what a thing it was, right, for his legacy, and to say he kind of did this for him, and and him being part of it. And,
and I know it was sort of cheesy at the time, but in the fall, I remember him saying, I know you're laughing at me, but I have a good feeling about this Olympics coming up for you.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay. I'm sure every dad's ever said that, and now, in hindsight, it's sort of
stuck with you.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. Anyways,
That's a good note to end on, reminiscing those glory days. And so, thanks again for coming on and come down to the clinic for us. Where can our listeners get in touch with Dark Horse?
Well, through the website would be the easiest.
Okay.
So Dark Horse Athletic, no S on the end, at darkhorseathletic.ca.
Gotcha.
And it'll tell you when our next programs. We'll start a program at Weber here in town, and maybe a second one in town in January.
Cool. Excellent. I'll include a link on the podcast description. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. We appreciate all the support. And thanks, Dr. Uchacz, for showing up again.
you're welcome.